Welcome. I'm Don Moss, Dean of the College of Integrative Medicine and Health Sciences, here to welcome you to Saybrook University's January 2025 virtual learning experience. It's my pleasure and my honor to introduce our opening keynote speaker, Dr. Ruthann Russo. Dr. Russo is an integrative health practitioner advocating for health equity and health justice. She provides community acupuncture at the Zen Den in New Jersey, and she serves as co-principal investigator for a research study on community-based maternal and infant health equity research, sponsored by Tammy Murphy, the First Lady of New Jersey. Ruthann Russo has proudly served Saybrook University as an adjunct faculty member in mind-body medicine since 2014. She earned a PhD in mind-body medicine from Saybrook University as one of her 4 earned doctorate degrees. Her history of education demonstrates her commitment to lifelong learning. Just for example, she holds a doctorate in acupuncture and Chinese medicine from Pacific College, a certificate in health and wellness coaching from Columbia University, a PhD in business administration and healthcare administration from Touro University International, an MPH public health from Rutgers, and a JD in healthcare law from American University. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, who will provide a meditation on the relationship among health equity, the indigenous science of permaculture, and integrative health practices. Welcome, Ruthann.
Thank you so much, Don, and thank you for inviting me to be here. And hello, everyone. It is an honor to be with you all this first day of spring 2025 semester. Although the title of the presentation is a meditation, and there will be some meditative components, we won't actually be meditating today, just want to make sure I'm clear about that with everyone. And I will be bringing up the PowerPoint in just a moment. But before I do that, I'd also like to mention that it would be, I would appreciate if you have any comments or questions as we're moving along the presentation, if you'd like to go ahead and just include those in the chat. And the way we'll manage that is at the end, depending on how much time we have available at the end of the presentation, and may be able to get to some of those comments and questions. But if not, Ray has kindly agreed to actually forward all of your comments and questions to me after the presentation so I can actually respond personally. And I am more than happy to do that. So please, whatever you'd like to say or ask in the chat, please feel free to do that. So I am going to go ahead now and begin by sharing my screen. So again, the presentation is a meditation on the relationship among Indigenous medicine, permaculture, integrative health practices, and health justice. And I would like to start with just a simple acknowledgement, a simple but very important acknowledgement, and that is that in this presentation, we study practices derived from traditional medicine that rely upon Indigenous methods from the majority world. So let us all acknowledge and honor the deep roots of these practices in nature and also experience them with reverence for their history and their creators. And also to mention that this presentation was prepared by me while standing on a part of the earth originally inhabited by the Lenape people. So we are all here together in community. It may be a virtual community, but still it is a community in which we're sharing a common experience. And similar to traditional and Indigenous practices, if you'd like to, please set an intention for our time together and for how you might use and or build upon this work. So we'll just wait a moment if you'd like to set an intention, and then we'll move on. Okay, so moving forward, this presentation, as you will notice throughout the presentation, is rooted in nature. and also with gratitude to Mother Earth. So we're going to start out with just a very brief guided imagery in which you will be in nature. You're certainly welcome to use this photo if you'd like to keep your eyes open. This is a photo of the Santa Cruz Mountains in California that I took about a year ago. But whatever you would like to do to just immerse yourself in nature for just a moment, either eyes open or close, and we'll do a rotation through the senses. So you can embed yourself in nature and hopefully hold that with you as we move on. So again, hopefully you've landed wherever you would like to be in nature. And in this place, take a moment to just look around and immerse yourself. What do you see? What do you hear? What nature sounds are getting your attention? Smells, the smells of wherever your place in nature is. Perhaps taste, perhaps something just kind of sitting in your palate. And then finally, what do you feel? What do you physically feel? That sense of touch, perhaps something beneath your feet, against your skin, in your hands. And then just close with a moment to connect to the wisdom of your heart and notice how you feel embedded in nature. And if you'd like to come back to our community, just take a moment to reorient yourself while keeping that memory of nature in mind. Open your eyes if they're not already opened, and we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you for that. So we all know here at Saybrook, obviously, there are many research-based benefits of connecting to nature, right? We know there's physiological benefits, improves our heart rate variability, natural killer cells. There's psychological, emotional, spiritual, and social benefits. Won't go into all of them because I think probably most of us are familiar with what they were or what they are. So, and you know, our ancestors knew that this was the case, and we know that this is the case, that nature is good for us. And yet, the majority of Americans, the great majority of Americans, in some studies as much as 93% of us, claim to spend less than 8% of our time outdoors. And so it's a simple shift, but for some reason a challenging shift. And as we move along, perhaps, you know, you might have thoughts about how this whole approach to more nature might be something that we could work towards and how we might do that. The presentation slides, as you will notice in this presentation, do incorporate nature. And although the research shows that just viewing scenes of nature improves our ANS function and our ability to manage stress, it's my hope that connecting to nature through these slides will actually inspire you to spend more time outdoors. May not always be easy, but it's just a seed, just planting a seed. Okay, now to move on with the actual presentation, we're going to start out by defining the 4 principles that we are looking into that are in the title of the presentation. So we'll talk about and define traditional and indigenous medicine, permaculture principles, integrative health practices, and health justice. Once we actually work with these definitions and we've established them, then we'll move on and we'll actually do a view will actually look at and dive in a little bit deeper to 8 of the 12 permaculture principles. And with each of those 8 principles, again, each one of them will spend just a little bit of time kind of having a meditative perspective on it and then defining it. And then after that, we'll actually go into looking at examples of healthcare here in the US where permaculture principles and health justice are maybe not overtly, but are naturally embedded. And then we'll just kind of play around with what does this mean, right? What does this mean for the bigger picture of health justice? All right, so starting out with traditional and indigenous medicine, we're actually going to look at 2 definitions. The first is from the World Health Organization. So theirs is pretty basic and straightforward, and the next is actually research-based. So traditional and indigenous medicine, the definition is traditional indigenous medicine are knowledge, skills, and practices based on theories, beliefs, and experiences that are indigenous to different cultures. And these are used to maintain health and the prevention, diagnosis, improvement, or treatment of physical and mental illness. So I'm going to share a little bit of a different perspective on this and just ask you to take a moment with the highlighted section of this definition. And also to consider, what does that highlighted section sound like or mean to you? A lot like primary care, maybe something like public health. And certainly in all the work that the World Health Organization has been doing with and around traditional and indigenous medicine, one of the things that they do acknowledge is the importance of traditional medicine in primary care. And again, as we look at some of the examples, this may unfold a little bit more clearly. So here's our second definition of traditional and indigenous medicine. This is primarily from Seladwen et al., although I did pull a little bit from the Lee article. And I do have, this is also a PowerPoint, by the way, I'm willing to share with everyone. If you'd like to either let me know, or Ray, if there's a way we can just get it to everyone, I'm happy to do that. But the bottom of this slide does have the links for, and anytime that I am actually mentioning an article, there are links at the bottom and also at the end of the presentation. So Seladwen et al. Is a really interesting article, and it actually takes an ethical perspective or an ethical look at how Westerners use principles of traditional and indigenous medicine, specifically how we use them to guide Western psychedelic research and practice. But within that article, what they do is they define traditional and indigenous medicine in the following way. It is the interconnections of humans and the environment. So again, something that wasn't really mentioned in the World Health Organization definition, right? It also embeds collective and holistic care. And there is a belief that health is the sum of physical, spiritual, emotional, intellectual, and community well-being. So, a lot of that last bullet is something that we're all familiar with, maybe not the community well-being piece. And so again, just to kind of bring our attention to those highlighted areas, one of the things that we will see as we move throughout this information is this focus on community and the collective and how that's inherent to health. Okay, so now we will move into permaculture and defining permaculture. So Rosemary Morrow is one of the founders, along with Holmgren. She is one of the founders of, or I would say the creators of the concept of permaculture and permaculture principles, keeping in mind that it is in fact fully derived from indigenous methods. And that is something that is very clearly acknowledged in the work that they've done as well. And we'll talk a little bit about, why permaculture, why did I choose permaculture? How did this get to be a focus as we move through the slides as well? So please, if you can hold space for that would be wonderful. So permaculture, a philosophy of working with rather than against nature that is based on indigenous methods to create systems that benefit and teach others, regenerate the earth, promote equal distribution of resources, and build on a culture of self-reliance, community values, and practical skills. So I'm actually also going to ask a question if you wouldn't mind responding in in the chat. I won't be able to see that, but we'll look at it at the end, and you all certainly can look at it with each other. But I'm wondering if any of you have any significant experience with permaculture, or just generally what your experience and knowledge of permaculture and or permaculture principles are. So if you wouldn't mind kind of, letting us know, maybe you're very experienced, maybe you even are involved in the practice of permaculture, as opposed to what we're doing here today, which is really dealing with it at the philosophical basis, at the theoretical basis, right? So yeah, if you'd like to do that, I'd appreciate it. Okay, so one more look at this definition. And again, each time kind of zooming in on some of the components. And again, equitable distribution, that sounds a little bit like getting closer to health justice, right? You can see how some of these are starting to kind of be interwoven with the others. And then I have highlighted specifically this idea of self-reliance and community values, because in some ways they might sound like they are competing priorities, right? But I think the way, if you step back and kind of look at permaculture and permaculture principles, the way that we actually see this idea of being reliant on yourself, and if you can think about that from the healthcare system perspective as well, right? We want to be self-reliant, but we also want to use the healthcare system in the way that makes the most amount of sense for us. But you need both of those. And so in some ways, this is kind of like the yin and the yang, right? We need self-reliance and we need community. And at different times and different circumstances, that may be more self-reliant focused or more community focused. So again, just something to think about. And now moving on to, we are going to get to integrative health practices, but first, because you can't really talk about, or at least I believe you can't really talk about integrative health practices unless you first define integrative medicine. We're going to look at that. So integrative medicine, this definition, by the way, comes from primarily from 14 different peer-reviewed articles that are all denoted at the bottom. And I then pulled this along with one of my colleagues, at Kane University, pulled this together to come up with that definition that we're actually going to look at in a moment here. And again, this is the ideal, I want to precursor it by saying the ideal version of integrative medicine. So it is low cost. You notice I have certain things highlighted, and we'll talk about, you can probably guess why. We'll talk about that when we get through the whole definition, but it's low cost, collaborative, person-centered. And again, kind of thinking about some of those other definitions we just looked at, you can see where there's some overlap, right? Some kind of weaving of similarity. Combines conventional medicine with complementary interventions, relies upon the body's innate healing response to promote well-being, and emphasizes patient participation and empowerment, treatment of the whole person, and also health justice. Now, I want to mention that this is denoting the ideal definition of integrative medicine. And we all know that integrative medicine can be, in certain from certain perspectives, it can be high cost, and it may actually represent the antithesis of health justice. And I know that we work towards looking at integrative medicine from the health justice perspective here at Saybrook University. And in this meditation together, let's seek to identify the components of integrative medicine, such as integrative health practices that we'll look at on the next slide, that meet this definition. Okay, and it's something just to continue, right, to work towards. Now, finally, integrative health practices. So this definition actually comes from an article that Dr. Fortune and I published a while ago. In fact, I think the definition still stands up, but I think we need to actually probably update this particular review article. But in the meantime, let's look at the definition. It is evidence-based, safe integrative medicine interventions with roots in traditional and indigenous medicine. So obviously we want to focus on that as well. We want to acknowledge that. And here's the key piece, that individuals can learn and practice on their own or in groups and community, being in groups and community. So the difference would be, okay, acupuncture that you receive from a licensed acupuncturist, that's integrative medicine. Acupressure that maybe the acupuncturist taught you and you learn and do on your own, that's an integrative health practice. Okay, so simple definition, but just that's the differentiation there. And then just to take a moment, what are some practices that you can think of that fit this definition, right? So if you want to type those in, what are practices that are maybe the ones that are your favorites? Maybe it's meditation, maybe it's yoga. There are obviously, as we know, many, many out there. So just kind of share those with each other as well. And then finally, our last definition, health justice. So this is from a recent article on kind of, I think, one of the best definitions I was able to find, a community-led movement that assumes healthcare is a fundamental right, okay? We could obviously do a whole presentation about that, but let's just hold that in our hearts for now. Healthcare is a fundamental right, builds the individual's power to create conditions that support their health and improves health equity by removing barriers to healthcare access. And so that's really the biggest difference between just pure health equity and health justice, is the fact that health justice removes the barriers. So obviously we've got tons of barriers here, especially in the United States, right? Language, cultural barriers, economic barriers. Transportation barriers, it kind of goes on and on. Some of these can actually be improved by this focus on integrative health practices and the use of permaculture principles. Some of them may take obviously a little bit more than just that. And again, this focus on community, right? We continue to see that as a common theme throughout these 4 concepts. And then the power of individuals to create conditions, right? Really this focus on the power of the individual, that self-reliance, kind of connects to what we've just been looking at in some of the prior definitions as well. And so you may have found other common themes just in what we were looking at as we moved along the slides here. But the question, what do traditional and indigenous medicine, permaculture, integrative health practices, and health justice have in common? Here's a couple of the bullets that I pulled together. Whole person health, that focus on community plus self-reliance / practical skills, connection to the earth and Mother Nature, promotion of health and well-being, and then equitable access to resources without barriers. Now, next, what we're going to do is we're going to look at 8 of the 12 permaculture principles, and then we'll actually apply them to some examples of healthcare in the US where these principles and health justice are actually naturally embedded. But before we do that, let's take a breath and just reconnect to nature once again. Dive back into nature, and specifically, we're going to use this metaphor of a bridge. The use of a bridge, the use of permaculture as a bridge. So together with integrative health practices, permaculture principles are actually meant to serve as a bridge, at least in terms of the way I look at this, right? Between indigenous medicine and the search for health justice and a sustainable solution in healthcare. I mean, perhaps someday, maybe that will be called universal integrative healthcare. But for right now, it's just the move forward to figure out, what does this look like? And once again, I would like to mention that the use of permaculture principles in this presentation and in this this perspective that we're looking at how to potentially use permaculture principles, it is not meant to replace or usurp traditional or indigenous methods. Rather, it's meant to be used as a bridge. The use of language and metaphors, this is kind of my thinking, just to share with you, is that the use of language and metaphors that are actually embedded in permaculture principles may make it easier in the modern world and in the midst of late-stage capitalism to see true connections between nature, healthcare, and health. And so this is maybe a little bit jarring after being in that nice sedating picture of nature and the bridge. But here, just another way of looking at how permaculture principles and integrative health practices could be used as the bridge. So over on the left, you've got the kind of the original, right? Indigenous medicine and methods. Then we've got over on the right, our goal, right? Which is just and equitable healthcare. That doesn't exist yet. But now we're going to look at how potentially we could first define and dive into these permaculture principles, and then how they might actually be joined with integrative health practices to create a better option, so to speak. Oh, and the other thing I also wanted to make sure that we're all aware of, although I'm sure we are, is that the United States is the only developed nation without universal health care. So we still have about 27 million people in this country that are not insured, right? Even with Obama, even with the Obama Care Act. So we are going to look at, or what I've pulled together, are 8 of the 12 permaculture principles that I think can actually be specifically used to as a lens to kind of see the idea of healthcare here in the United States in a different way through this different lens. So the first, we're going to read through each one of these, and we're going to look at how to kind of provide a theme around each grouping, and then we'll look at each one individually. So observing and interacting. And I'll just stop in between each one just to let you kind of process the language here. For some of you, it may be new. Apply self-regulation and accept feedback. Design from patterns to details. Using slow and small solutions. And then integrate rather than segregate. Value diversity. Use edges and value the marginal. And finally, creatively use and respond to change. Now, let's take a moment and look at these 8 principles from the perspective of 2 different themes, 2 themes that actually encompass 4 and 4. So over here on the left, we've got awareness, the theme of awareness. And we've got the first 4 of the permaculture principles here: observe and interact, apply self-regulation, and accepting feedback. So that accepting feedback is the awareness piece of that. Design from patterns to details, kind of bigger picture to zooming in to smaller, again, being aware of that, and using small and slow solutions. Now moving over to the right of the screen, diversity. Integrate rather than segregate. Some of the words themselves, right? I mean, they just flow so beautifully. Value diversity. Use edges and value the marginal. Creatively use and respond to change. Now, as we're reading through these, just keep in mind that they were created from Indigenous methods based upon how Indigenous people interact with the earth, right? Interact with nature. But because the earth and nature and human health are considered all part of the same perspective by Indigenous people, as we read through these, they obviously, each one of these statements apply to each one of us, whether it's us as individuals, that self-reliant piece, or us in a community. Okay, so now back to nature and back to the permaculture principles and diving into each one of them. So here's another thing I invite you to do as we move through each one of these principles. What therapeutic options come to mind for you? And if you want to go ahead and type those in, and again, I would love to, any feedback that you have, any ideas that you have, I'd love to hear them, or questions that you might have. And, maybe we could even continue the conversation post this. So observe and interact. I'm just going to leave a moment as we start each one of these new permaculture principles. I'm just going to leave a moment for you to sit with the language and the photo, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the details. Okay, so this is actually the first permaculture principle: observe and interact. Observing nature is believed to reveal that everything is connected, right? So the permaculture principle of observe and interact is basically the idea that reading the landscape for a year prior to cultivating it is necessary. It's necessary to understand the pre-existing patterns that are created by nature and that ancestral use of the land. This concept is the foundation of permaculture design. It's the foundation of any system, right? And thinking about that, observing and interacting, right? How could we apply that to the human body, health, the healthcare system? So, some things that come to mind that I just like to share are observing our whole self in response to the symptoms that we have. So, this is for both the patient and the practitioner. Don't rush a treatment, except in the case of an emergency, of course, because we are an integrative health. That's an integrative health and integrative medicine. We are looking at conventional medicine, obviously, and complementary peacefully coexisting in the optimal way. But don't rush a treatment, and first do no harm. That's the first ethical principle of conventional medicine, or of any medicine, right? First, do no harm. And in addition, create a treatment that is specific to the person. And then from a more simple perspective, the simplest perspective, this idea of observing and interacting could be a practice of meditation, yoga. So that's the observing, right, of the self, but then taking a meditation practice off the cushion, taking a yoga practice off the mat. That's where you would apply that to the interact piece. All right. So next is apply self-regulation and accept feedback. Like the earth, the human body has a natural tendency to maintain a stable, balanced environment, right? We call this homeostasis, right? The earth has the same exact concept. So what can we do to support homeostasis? What are some of the modalities that you use yourself to support balance? Next permaculture principle, design from patterns to details. Be a moment with this. So, it's true that the closer we get, the less we're able to comprehend the bigger picture, right? We need to understand both, but by zooming out, we see the boundaries, we see the inputs and the outputs of a system. And everything that we metabolize as human beings, whether it's our food, our environment, expectations at work, everything that we metabolize has an impact on us. And so by zooming out to see what are those inputs, right, that can help us better understand that bigger picture. And also, the other thing to consider here is that in the larger social and community context, rather than just our anatomy and physiology, it is potentially that larger context that can actually determine whether a particular solution will be a success for us, right? Our environment, the community. And that requires zooming out, right? Zooming out from that more microscopic level. And really thinking of examples of this idea of designing from patterns to details. Almost any traditional medicine, whether you're talking Ayurveda, TCM, any traditional medicine will use this idea of patterns to details. Okay, so this is our last permaculture principle in the awareness theme. Use slow and small solutions. This is one of my favorite ones just because, like, hands in the dirt is such an amazing thing. This idea of moving with the pace of nature, using slow and small solutions, non-invasive, natural solutions first. And again, assuming this is not an emergency, right? We know that conventional medicine is the best when it comes to emergency scenarios. We're not trying to overstep that, but recognize that non-invasive natural solutions in the right cases can make a difference. And even in this photo, right? This, the photo depicts hands in the soil, hands in the dirt. And we know that there are so many mental and physical health benefits of putting our hands in the soil. Boosts our serotonin, our immunity, our mood. And whenever we do anything of a self-reliant nature, whether that's growing our own food, even maintaining our health, right? We are in some way, shape, or form using slow and small solutions. And again, any ideas that you have or any slow and small solutions that maybe you practice, please feel free to add those. Okay, so now we are going to look at the diversity themes, the 4 diversity themes or permaculture principles. The first is connections between things are important, and that is really this idea of integrating rather than segregating. And consider how things work as part of an integrated system. We need cooperation, we need symbiotic relationships, and cooperation and symbiotic relationships are actually much more adaptive, as we know. Pulling together things that are different often create optimal outcomes. So, an example of that from a healthcare perspective could be someone with low back pain may benefit the most from physical therapy, acupuncture, and herbs. Right. So that's an example of, of integrating. Just even the concept of integrative medicine, right, takes us there as well. Use and value diversity. All right, so in nature, this idea of using and valuing diversity actually requires a balance between stability and variety. And this can actually translate to honoring it from the human perspective, right? Honoring the diversity of languages, of cultures. I mean, even just the language itself speaks to this, what we now call the DEIB initiatives or whatever that might be in different organizations. But just having that, just creating that way to honor diversity. And, another way to do that, remember way back in one of the first slides, we looked at the World Health Organization's definition of traditional and indigenous medicine, right? And part of that definition really saw the essence of traditional and indigenous medicine practices as the basis for primary care. So that would be, just another way of looking at this. Not saying we're replacing conventional primary care, but what could that look like if we used some of those traditional and indigenous methods and practices? So use edges and value the margins. Edges are actually the most dynamic and productive part of all natural systems. It's at the edges where the exchange of materials and energy takes place, and the soil is richest in the marginal area. So these statements are all coming from the permaculture principles, right? But when you think of them from the human perspective, right? How does that make you feel? What ideas come to mind, right? This is kind of like opening up things in a little bit of a different way. This contribution of the edges as well as the marginal and invisible aspects of any system should be recognized and expanded. And in a few slides, when we start to look at actually applying these concepts, I think some of this may be a little bit more helpful. So practices. Some of my favorite practices when I think about this idea of edges and the marginal, and especially because the marginal is the invisible, are energy medicine practices, right? They're safe, they're invisible, but they can be effective. Reiki, therapeutic touch, shamanism, even in some ways, prayer. Okay, this is our last permaculture principle. Creatively use and respond to change. Another favorite picture here. So here is where we really need to appreciate the dynamic balance between stability and change. Okay, so again, a lot of this is yin and yang. We saw this in the last slide as well, right? This idea of diversity, and the balance between stability and variety. Here we're talking about the balance between stability and change. Change is inevitable, as we know, but how can we make the best of it? And the transformation of a caterpillar, I actually pulled this onto the slide here because in the permaculture principles, which again are derived from indigenous methods, the transformation of a caterpillar is often referenced, and it's believed to be a symbol of adaptive change that is uplifting rather than threatening. So here's where, it really becomes our charge to say, change is inevitable. How can we use this concept of change that is uplifting? And I think in some ways, traditional medicine, traditional and indigenous medicine, as the precursors to integrative medicine and integrative health, really say it all, right? Something as simple as a dietary change. Let's say that the use of the doshas in Ayurvedic medicine, right? I've seen people over the years, use that concept to change their relationship with food, to change how they ate. And this allowed them to be much more adaptive in terms of facing chronic conditions, in terms of just facing change in general. And so that's, a little bit of a different way of looking at it, but it's definitely a possibility. Okay, so those are our 8 permaculture principles. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to look at some examples of healthcare practices here in the US that embody these indigenous methods and permaculture principles, as well as health, equity, and justice. All right, so here we have different ends of the spectrum, right? We've got birth, we've got death. So some of these ideas, these practices, right? Basic natural practices, home birth, breastfeeding, the use of doulas, and the use of traditional practices at that end of the spectrum. And then if we move to the other end of the spectrum, dying with dignity and death midwives. So let's talk first about the home birth, the birth perspective here. I did want to mention that my research with equitable maternal and child health care in New Jersey does actually center around these bullets here on the slide. And in New Jersey, the predominant populations are from Haiti, Guatemala, and Liberia. And we actually work with the community to create optimal maternal and child health experiences that use the best of conventional medicine, conventional care, while simultaneously honoring their heritage and cultural traditions. And I will tell you, that has been such an interesting experience. So, for example, one of the things that we've recently been able to work with is allowing these women to identify what are some of their traditional medicine practices that they would like to see embedded in their actual care. So the Haitian population have come up with the use of okra water and a special herbal bath post-birth. Liberian population has an entire has the use of casa leaf, fufu, and palm butter soup. So, just specific whether they are eating practices or some, taking some other very simple but meaningful perspective has changed the way that they are viewing the system and has actually improved their outcomes. And that, I think, is the most important thing, right? That they're now more trustworthy of the healthcare system because the healthcare system is now embracing their traditional indigenous methods. And we found a way to actually do both. And then on the bottom of the slide, dying with dignity and death midwives. So death was understood by our ancestors to be a communal and even religious experience rather than a medical event, right? And obviously it still is. It's just that usually the medical event precedes it. I don't know a lot about death midwives, but I will say that when I was doing some of the research for the presentation, I saw that on Friday, there is a continuing education event on community death care and death midwifery that Saybrook University is actually sponsoring. So I think it's actually open to anyone, but you have to be there in person. It's not a virtual event. But again, just shows you the fact that Saybrook University, as we know, is already embracing all of these principles. All right, so now I'd like to move on to acupuncture. Obviously, one of a practice that is near and dear to my heart, but also there are many organizations, acupuncture organizations, that really embrace this idea of Indigenous practices as well as permaculture principles and health justice. And a couple of them are working class acupuncture, people's organization of community acupuncture, and then Acupuncturists Without Borders. So the first two are community acupuncture clinics. And then Acupuncturists Without Borders is just like Doctors Without Borders out there throughout the entire world, providing kind of pop-up ear acupuncture clinics. So the pictures that we're looking at here are actually of the clinic where I work here in New Jersey. And this is the hallway. Where you are right now is in the hallway walking towards the community acupuncture clinic. So when people come off the street, this is the first thing that they see. And I think from a permaculture and an Indigenous perspective, this is kind of embracing the idea of spirit of place, right? We are making reference to Indigenous Chinese principles. There's also this nice, calm, dim lighting. We've got diffusers. You can't actually smell what's going on here, but diffusers with nature smells. And of course, there's nature scenes. And I feel like the treatment begins the moment you walk in the door. When I first went here, I actually went here as a patient before I became a practitioner here. And I felt like I became extremely relaxed and felt better the moment I walked in the door, just walking down this hallway. And with acupuncture, that stays with you because once acupuncture needles are removed, the effects of the treatment still remain. And so the next slides, what I would like to do here is take you into the clinic, which is where we are now. This is the actual community acupuncture clinic, and talk about how this clinic actually embraces all of the permaculture principles that we just looked at. So what you see here are these are actual zero gravity chairs. People come in, they pick where they want to sit, they get their treatment, they can sit for a while. And even though during the pandemic, we ended up putting up these little walls just for safety purposes and never took them down. But people do actually talk to each other through the walls, believe it or not. Not loudly because there's a lot of respect for each other here as well. But the community component is part of the treatment. Okay, being in community is definitely part of the treatment here. And so observing and interacting, it's the community interacting with each other, it's the patient and the practitioner, applying self-regulation and accepting feedback. Patients are sitting sometimes for up to an hour, to receive that feedback from the needles. Designing from patterns to details. Again, as we talked about before, traditional medicine is all about big picture, right? We even call it patterns in traditional Chinese medicine. Someone might have a pattern of qi deficiency or liver stagnation. And then we zoom into the specific acupuncture points that will help that. And then using slow and small solutions. Again, you're sitting for almost an hour, and acupuncture is not meant to be, it's not like a pill that you take and suddenly you feel better. It can take time to actually make a difference. Okay, so now we've got the diversity principles. So the 4 diversity principles that we looked at: integrate rather than segregate. So traditional medicine, just the reverence overall for pulling any kind of solution for a patient. And here in this clinic, we use different forms of treatment. Yes, acupuncture is the primary treatment that we use, but we also use essential oils. In fact, you can see the cabinet of essential oils in the sort of corner of the room there. Hypnosis, wellness coaching, herbs, Reiki, sound bowls, many different options for patients. In terms of valuing diversity, we do have a lot of referrals to conventional practitioners, just by way of example. Use edges and value the marginal. So here's cost effective. I didn't mention this before, but we do have a sliding scale. We don't turn anyone away. And more importantly, we accommodate and respect the time that is needed to heal. 4th, creatively use and respond to change. This is really, I think, mostly embedded in the next slide. So I'm going to move us there to look at this idea of creatively responding to change. Now, this is a photo actually from Acupuncturists Without Borders. And Acupuncturists Without Borders provides trauma-informed integrative care to communities who are impacted by disasters, violence, war, poverty, and social injustice. And so I think this is a really good example of how a community can help to work around the system of injustice. And so, for example, what they're doing here in terms of ear acupuncture, a change in your ability to manage chronic pain and deal with diversity can help you deal with what's going on in the environment around you. I did want to mention quickly, Indigenous practices also include setting an intention and embracing ritual and ceremony. We started out our time together here with all of us setting an intention, if that's something that you wanted to do. And rituals also give order to our lives and provide a sense of security and control. Even that acupuncture clinic that I showed you all the pictures of, there's a lot of ritual, right, embedded in the practices there as well. And so in our practice, as well as in potentially Acupuncturists Without Borders, giving a client the opportunity to set an intention can actually help the healing process. So David Holmgren, also one of the pioneers of permaculture principles, has identified healthcare goals, permaculture healthcare goals that I also wanted to share. He talks about the fact that permaculture principles are embedded in this idea of developing useful self-sufficiency skills. But it's this second bullet here, moving from being a dependent consumer to an interdependent producer of health. That's this kind of sweet spot, right? That's where we want to be. Not dependent upon conventional medicine. And the reason I have the picture here is because we've been talking about this idea of setting an intention for our time together, setting an intention for your health care. What if every time we took a prescription medicine, what if we set an intention? How could that shift? A simple, again, slow and small solution, something kind of embedded in these permaculture principles. How can something like that make a difference? Now, I'm quickly going to go through a couple of other examples here. I won't be applying the permaculture principles just in the spirit of time, but I did want to share a couple of other examples of healthcare in the US where permaculture principles and health justice are naturally embedded. So the Lincoln Recovery Center Ear Acupuncture Clinic, this was actually founded back in the 1970s. It was founded, I want to say staffed originally by the Young Lords and the Black Panthers with Dr. Michael O. Smith, an MD. He was the medical director. This picture is a little blurry because it's from the early 2000s when I actually worked there. So I apologize, but I thought it was really important to be able to show you a picture of the actual clinic. It no longer exists in this format. It closed down in this format when Michael Smith died in 2012. But just an amazing opportunity, right? There were about 100 chairs here. Patients come in, most of them were not insured, or they were Medicaid recipients, and they would come in, swab their ears with alcohol. So they took the responsibility to do that. They picked their own chair where they would sit, raise their hand when they're ready to actually be treated, raise their hand when they wanted the needles to be removed. And this was, again, just ear acupuncture. But they also incorporated in the room outside of this, they also incorporated 12-step meetings, integrative health practices, things like yoga, meditation, et cetera. So you can kind of see. But again, here, the group was a significant part of the treatment. People showed up day after day after day because of the other people who were there. And more importantly, probably potentially most importantly, it made a difference. It actually improved it was actually originally founded, as I mentioned, because of the opioid and cocaine, I think, epidemics that were going on in the Bronx. In the Bronx at that time, and really made a big difference in terms of improving those issues. Now, we also have another way of looking at community being treated. This is Jeffrey Geller. Many of you are probably already familiar with him, but he is one of the founders, maybe actually the founder of this concept of group medical visits. He hails from up in Massachusetts. And what you see here is him on the right treating some folks with acupuncture. They're actually lying instead of seated. And on the left, this is a group. I think this is a food-related group because it looks like they're all holding apples, green apples. But his clinics, what's most significant about his clinics is that he pulls people together in community for these treatments, and he has figured out a way to get reimbursed from conventional health insurance companies. And so that is a really important way to make sure, especially for Medicaid patients, right, that they can get the care that they need. 12-step meetings, I'd be remiss without including them in this, this whole idea of these are the original grassroots organizations addressing addictions in this country, right? They're free. They lean on the concepts of spirituality, community, self-reliance. And again, I just want to say community because community is probably one of the most important concepts embedded in 12-step meetings. Federally qualified health centers, another really important component to consider. Federally qualified health centers are the only form of socialized medicine that exists in our country. No one will be turned away from a community, a federally qualified health center if they have, for lack of insurance. If they are an immigrant, they will be protected and cared for, assuming that all of this remains the same moving forward. This has been the case for many decades in this country. And I've done many research studies with federally qualified health centers, and we have a participatory action research study going on right now where they are the individuals who are administrators and some of the entry-level practitioners. We've taught them integrative health practices, and they are now teaching patients in the waiting room because, as you can imagine, they're understaffed and overbooked with patients. And so wait times are oftentimes an hour. So now we're using integrative health practices to make a difference there. The whole health system from the VA, extremely important in this concept of health justice. And now whole health in the states has been pulled in to a certain extent by some Medicaid programs. There's also some philanthropic organizations who are providing whole health in the states as well. And one last one is just lifestyle medicine. I just thought this was just a really interesting and important thing to mention because the government in New York City is now embracing lifestyle medicine. And really, as a practical matter, these pillars of lifestyle medicine, sleep, movement, nutrition, managing stress, managing substances, and most importantly, community are really just another way of packaging traditional and Indigenous medicine, right? And this is something that is now being embraced. It was launched in the Bronx, and it is now throughout all of New York City, all the New York City hospitals. So here's just an overview of what we've just looked at. On the left, we've got health justice approach, everything that we looked at, and what that looks like in terms of the human being and some of the details. And again, I'm happy to send you this PowerPoint if you'd like the details here. And this is just another table that I put together looking at the principles of permaculture, and then what are some microtherapeutic level interventions or integrative health practices, right? We can kind of mix and match with all this. And that's one of the beautiful things, how integrative health practices fit directly with so many of the permaculture principles. Just a reminder of that bridge, Indigenous methods and everything that we talked about over on the left, permaculture principles and IHPs kind of like being that bridge to what these final interventions look like, whether they're support groups, whether it's public health, like the government in New York City, whether it's federally qualified health centers, community treatments. The point is that there's all these pockets of opportunity to actually create health justice that is in some way, shape, or form impacted by integrative health practices and permaculture principles. And I just want to end by taking us back to your intention, whatever you set your intention to be, if you just want to reconnect to that and see how that went for you.